One of these vegetables is going to die tonight. But which one will it be? Find out at the end of the episode. The Walking Dead, it's so popular. What's it been? It's been over 10 years. That's been one of the best-selling comic books, and it defies everything about comic book popularity you'd expect. It's not about superheroes. It's in black and white, not color. It's not from Marvel or DC, a big publisher. It's a ridiculously popular comic book, and also, of course, a very popular TV show. Now, that said, Walking Dead has a set of its own tropes. And I think that that's what we're going to go over today. We're going to go over tropes. I'm going to also give you guys a few little tidbits of trivia, because anyone who watched my Invincible video, they would know that I've been proofreading Robert Kirkman's comics since day one, and that includes Walking Dead. So there's a few tiny bits of trivia I could go over. Nothing groundbreaking, but some fun stuff. And I love it. I love the comic. I love the comic a lot more than I love the TV show, to be honest. I think the singular vision of Robert Kirkman in comic book form is the best version of that story. Anyway, I think it would be a lot of fun to review issue number 100 in particular, because that's to a large extent what the most recent 7th season premiere was based on, is issue 100. Now that was over 5 years ago, so yeah, it'll be spoilers, but only if you haven't kept up with the comic. We're going to go over it in brief. We're going to look for the tropes, see how many there are, and I'm also going to give you a little look at the Walking Dead experience that you can go to at Universal Studios, just for fun. So the first things first, let's go over tropes you could expect to find in any given issue of The Walking Dead. Explicit gore, a main character dying, a double-page spread, a splash page cliffhanger, a character getting permanently disfigured, a character talking about exactly what's going on in his or her head, Carl acting ruthless, zombies getting cut apart like they're made of butter, a member of Rick's group betraying them, an evil and well-organized society, Rick's right-hand man killing loads of zombies, characters having a hookup and engaging in pillow talk, stat panels with little or super minor differences, never using the word zombies and even inventing other terms for them regularly, one of the main characters going crazy. Issue 100 was a big deal. It was a milestone issue. Might have been the best-selling comic of the year. Let's take a look at how many copies it sold. Yeah, that's really, really impressive. And it was cool because it also introduced us finally to Negan, the head of an evil society that was basically extorting all the other towns. And if The Walking Dead has a theme, it's that humans are the real monster, as compared to the zombies in this post-apocalyptic world. And between issues 80 to 90, the zombie threat got greatly diminished. Rick, the main character, literally says zombies are a manageable threat. And at that point, the human threat became even more pronounced, if anything, than it ever had been before. Let's start the story. The story begins as almost an epilogue of sorts to the story we've been reading so far. Negan's men are preparing to head back home. A bunch of Rick's crew in Alexandria, those are our good guys, they're all just sort of going through the motions of survival. And that's because one of the main characters, Abraham, was recently killed by Negan's men. Basically, the two towns of Alexandria and wherever Negan lives, that's a secret, have been butting heads, and Rick and his people have recently killed a bunch of them. They killed Abraham. Things are escalating. It's all been building. Have you ever wondered why Alexandria, Virginia is where all the survivors in Rick's group live?
I think that a big part of why Robert Kirkman chose that town is probably because that's where I was living at the time. And if you go back 7 or 8 years when that town was first introduced, we were a lot closer back then. It was definitely well before the TV show came along. And I think one thing that's kind of amusing is Robert's idea of Alexandria doesn't really match the real Alexandria. You have to go much further out in Virginia to get so woodsy and have such remote towns. The actual Alexandria is pretty darn close to DC, and it's a metro area itself. I mean, it's got main highways with Walmarts and, McDonald's and all that stuff. So you don't really see that in the comic or, of course, the TV show. But that's the real Alexandria. Our protagonist, Rick, is making his way back to Alexandria after scavenging for supplies. He's with his son Carl, Michonne, Maggie, Glenn, and Heath. So they're on their way home. It's getting late, and they decide to basically just sleep in their van and protect it for the night on the road because they're not going to make it back to Alexandria before sunset. We only come across one zombie in this whole story, basically, and it's not even a big moment. We're talking one single panel. Michonne beheads one. Easy as that, but that's a trope. The flimsy zombies. Now, early on, Michonne's sword and Rick's hatchet, things like that, they would actually get stuck in the zombies. But these days, they just cleave through them like they're made out of really hot butter. Zombies just break very easily. To be fair, the zombies, like every other character in this, are aging. So the zombies are getting more and more rotten. That said, does a skull or a spine disconnect that easily? It doesn't really matter in the long run. But it is something you can expect to find in every issue. Rick takes over on watch. And then at the bottom of this page, we've got 2 stat panels. Stat panels are where an artist has drawn an image and then they can basically, these days using Photoshop, back in the day using a light box to sort of trace it, but use the same panel multiple times. In this one, there is one slight difference. We see a shadow approaching in the second panel. But Robert specifically likes to use stat panels to indicate a type of slow time passing, which is something unique that you can do in comics. You have to use space to indicate time passing as compared to film and TV where you can actually show that in literal time. Stat panels. Rick is grabbed from behind, and at first we don't see his abductors, but we can hear them talking, and in fact, they refer to zombies as meat puppets. No Z word. There were 2 issues, to the best of my memory, where the word zombie got through by mistake. That's partly my fault. There are other proofreaders and there's an editor, but we're supposed to catch that stuff. Oops. Basically, in the world of The Walking Dead, George Romero's movies, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, they're not supposed to have existed, so the cultural term zombies doesn't exist. I mean, literally that word exists, but it's not what people call zombies because it doesn't exist in pop culture. Rick's whole group is suddenly surrounded by a lot of enemies, and in fact, we get a double-page spread. The double-page spread, now that's a trope that isn't necessarily unique to just Walking Dead. It's any Robert Kirkman comic book. And out of the group of bad guys comes Negan, their leader. So that's a trope. We've got an evil society. There have been plenty of these. Certainly the Whisperers are the current one. I won't go into that if you're not caught up. But before Negan, there was the Governor, and there have been others. There was the Cannibal Society that ate Dale's leg, or on the show, I think it was Herschel. Yeah, Herschel's leg. So there always seem to be these well-organized but morally bankrupt societies out there in The Walking Dead. I don't know. I think in my opinion, humanity would have bad eggs, but overall would want to rebuild society and work together. That's what I believe. I'm not sure I'm right. But anyway, we get to meet Negan, And by the way, what do you think of my Negan costume? I spent all of $1 on it. I went to the dollar store and I bought this bat. Painted it brown, put some tin foil on it for barbed wire. Already owned this jacket. This is just a t-shirt. Bargain basement. Now Negan is mad, and in my opinion, justifiably so. Rick went out and killed a bunch of his men. Rick was sort of arrogant. He thought that his crew had gotten to a point where they were tougher than anybody else. And he didn't consider the size of Negan's community. He didn't consider the repercussions. So while Negan is a bad guy, I do think a lot of this falls on Rick. I think that you could argue that it's a trope of Rick occasionally making bad decisions for his group. I don't think it's something you can find in every issue, though, or any given issue. But it does happen now and again. Negan has Rick's whole group kneel and threatens them one at a time to bash their heads in with his bat, Lucille. And he argues that there are good reasons not to kill each member. Maybe it would be playing the race card and he doesn't want to be seen as a racist. Maybe it doesn't make sense to beat up somebody that's already injured, like Carl, who's a kid. Or maybe it doesn't make sense to kill a leader, like Rick. So he decides on eeny, meeny, miny, mo, playing at random. And he comes on Glenn. Now, issue 100 means that we've been with these characters for well over 8 years. Glenn showed up in issue 2. He bashes Glenn's head in and kills him. So, first of all, that's the trope of gore. I don't think that one should surprise anyone. I mean, this is a horror comic book. We should encounter that all the time, and we do. But take a look at Glenn's head after he gets hit with a bat. That's pretty rough. That is pretty rough stuff. Glenn doesn't die right away. If he survived, I guess that would be permanent disfiguring. I don't know how you could survive, but maybe it's almost an act of mercy what happens next. Negan just bashes his head in and kills him. That's a main character dying. Beyond a trope, I mean, this title lives and dies on the fact that it constantly and regularly kills off both minor and major characters. Hardly anyone is safe. I think if anyone is safe, maybe Carl, to a close degree Rick. But you kind of know that every character is going to bite it at some point. Sometimes that's a little depressing. It mirrors that life can be random. I'm not necessarily sure what it says. Is it saying something? I mean, it says death comes for us all. And a lot of zombie movies, zombies move slowly because death slowly approaches us all. It works as a metaphor. I don't think The Walking Dead has ever spelled that out. I think it's more about the act of survival. I guess sometimes it does ask the question of whether it's all worth it. I think it does in the comic book anyway. I think that the show would benefit more from asking that same question. As Negan kills Glenn, he says that Lucille, his bat, is thirsty because she's a vampire bat. Negan is kind of likable in a way. I mean, what he does is horrible. It's atrocious. And yet, he does have lines. He will not let his people rape. And he believes in justice. He thinks he's creating a workable, manageable society. It's at least something I think we can relate to a little. And he jokes around, and he's got a potty mouth. I haven't even touched on that, but he drops the F word more than every other word. He's an interesting character. By the way, I said earlier that sometimes Rick makes decisions that aren't necessarily in the best interests of the group. For instance, when he's clearly outnumbered, and he's got his own kid next to him to protect. Nevertheless, Glenn gets killed and he's like, I'm going to kill you. He says that to Negan. It's like, dude, think that, but don't say it. Rick. Negan and his crew have made their point. They tell Rick, from now on, you belong to me. A portion of everything you harvest, of everything you scavenge, comes to me. And that's how Negan's society works. He wants these other areas, like Alexandria, to run and operate independently, basically. But he gets a portion of it, and he claims it's protection money. That's a pretty old racket, but it makes sense to a degree. I mean, it's not right. It's not the most constructive way of working together, but it makes a type of sense, at least for him. And it ends on a splash page, a cliffhanger of sorts, because I think the big question is, what's the fallout after this? One of the main characters has died, an overwhelming sense of force from this new threat. Overwhelming. And now they're walking away. But what happens next? It ends on a splash page. The splash page cliffhanger. Big trope for all Robert Kirkman comic books. I would argue that while issue 100 essentially tells the same story as the season premiere for season 7 of the Walking Dead TV show, I think that the comic book is much better paced. I mean, it shows an introduction of Negan. It displays his threat. It gives us our stakes. And then it ends with them leaving after having made their point. I think that that's a much more interesting place to end on, what's the fallout going to be after losing this main character, as compared to the TV show going, okay, we know that Negan has shown up and is going to, or kill someone, but we don't know which person he killed. Like, just waiting to know. I mean, I can understand the interest. I was interested too. Like, who did he kill? But that's not necessarily a story. I think that the season finale for 6 would have worked a lot better with Negan killing whoever, and then the fallout would be our big question. Like, how does Rick react to this? How does society move forward following that death? I think that that's the big question. They decided to use that for a season premiere. I understand it. I just think it works a lot better in comic book form. That's just my opinion. Your mileage may vary. Oh, I just went to the next page and I remembered another piece of trivia. Okay, so letter column in comics, very common. It's called letter hacks in this one. If you go back to issue 2, you'll see, I'll show the image here. I came up with that title. As I said, like, we were much closer there. I suggested that it should be called letter hacks because somebody that writes a lot of letters to a publication is called a letter hack. And of course, there's the obvious pun. I like the Walking Dead comic book. The Walking Dead show, I think there are episodes I love and there are episodes that kind of depress me. And I don't always want to be depressed. But it's not the only show like that. You could argue that Game of Thrones is another show that is very dark and is close to misery porn. I do think that Game of Thrones has a viewpoint, though, has something to say. I mean, that's based on a real story. I mean, the War of the Roses is a real thing that happened in history and is absolutely a clear template for Game of Thrones. So it's talking about, when there isn't a clear succession of power, this is what can happen to the land. This is what happens to all the people in that land. I think that that's an interesting story worth telling. But I also think that an apocalyptic story is a story worth telling. I just think that there should be some sort of character arc. And I think that the TV show just sort of has Rick sometimes learn he needs to be more merciful, and then sometimes learn he needs to be more ruthless. And it goes back and forth a little too cyclical for me. Maybe you love it, and that's fine. My sister adores The Walking Dead. I've got tons of friends that adore it, and I get it. It's exciting. It's good. But I love the comic book. That's what I love. Okay. I promised you a look at the Walking Dead experience. So this is just in brief, but let's take a quick look at the Walking Dead experience and see how close it mirrors either the TV show or the comic book. Let's see if you get your money's worth.
All right, so this is the Walking Dead attraction. Let's see if it's as scary as the comic books or TV show. Obviously based on the AMC show. I'll show you some of what I see.
It's very fun, very fun. Probably only about 5 minutes long, although you can take your time, so maybe you get up to 15 minutes or something walking through it. It's not bad. It's a pretty good representation more of the TV show, I think, than the comic. But that said, I can't think of too much that's close to that. You know, like what comic book has been adapted into an experience you can walk through. Nothing comes to mind. Nothing comes to mind. I thought it was great. A lot of fun. I totally recommend it. There's plenty that I didn't show that you can see and experience. Very, very cool. All right. Well, you know, I started this as Negan threatening to kill one of those vegetables. Let's find out who gets it.
Eeny. Meeny. Miny.
Oh, taking it like a champ.